Hi, this is Celeste, and this is the Celestial Report. And my guest today is Andrew Gabriel Roth, a dear friend of mine, somebody that I've studied Torah with through the years for many, many years. And so I would just like to welcome Andrew. He's been on the show before. So I know that you enjoy his teaching. And so I just thought I got an opportunity to actually meet him in person, him and his lovely wife, and just see what he is up to in his world since we've last chatted. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you for having me, Celeste. It's great to see you as always.
Yeah. So what's new? What's new in your world?
What isn't new at this point? Well, the most important thing is that, as you know, been working for the past 7 years on what is going to replace the Aramaic English New Testament, or the AENT, but we have basically reinvented it from the ground up with brand new research, cutting edge research, and new manuscript resources that we didn't have a decade ago. And the new work is called the Apostolic Writings. I finished the Apostolic Writings in terms of my role as a translator and basic proofreading editor about a month ago. And now it has to get laid out for print format, laid out for Kindle or ebook, and possibly also for some Bible software as well. I'm working on all of those things. And so some of this is brand new skill set for me. And as when I work through it, I will get a better idea as to when that will be released, but it definitely seems like we're on track to have those resources out in 2023. What used to be the appendix in the back of the AENT has been completely rewritten in a separate book called the Study Guide. And the Study Guide is coming out, as I said, as a separate text also later this year. So those are the two main mega projects that have been on my plate for quite a while. And I'm also, because I know a lot of people ask me, yes, I'm also working on the Tanakh, on the Hebrew Bible or Old Testament. And I got in some manuscripts last year, in addition to the Leningrad and the Aleppo Codex that a lot of people know. I got some other Hebrew witnesses that most folks don't know about, which I'm excited about, because they're earlier than those more famous texts. And so I'll be working on that, but it's going to probably take several years before I finish that. But that's all of what's the main stuff that's on my plate right now.
So when you do the Tanakh, is it going to be in separate volumes, like you do Bereshit, Genesis, Shemot, Exodus, and so forth?
I'm leaning towards that right now because my sources are so massive. I mean, it's not just like having the traditional Hebrew text. It's also about the Aramaic text as expressed in a full Aramaic translation done by Jews in Babylon, separate Aramaic literature that's known as the Targums, Samaritan Pentateuch, Dead Sea Scrolls. I mean, there's just so much stuff out there that it may be that the first volume I do, although I haven't decided yet, is going to be what we call a Chumash. A Chumash basically means the 5 books of Moses, the Torah, from Genesis to Deuteronomy, plus doing any of the readings from the prophets, the Haftorah, which is the weekly thing that goes attached to the Torah portion, and then some other parts from the writings like Psalms and everything that come up on special holidays and stuff like that would also have to be translated. But it would still be a lot easier than trying to do the whole thing, all at once. And at the end, it may be like 3 volumes or something like that to get it all out.
Yeah, I'm used to doing multi-volume, with all the various commentators. So for me, it's not a problem. But most people want like one condensed thing. But like you said, this is a monumental task that you our undertaking. So I want to bring you back to our visit, our
Yeah,
short,
yeah. It's
brief
awesome seeing
visit,
you.
and you just found something. If you can, you do you
Yeah, I
want to
can talk about
explain
it.
what you found?
Yeah, and I'll just preface this by saying, I believe we're talking about the Yeshua codes.
Yes.
Um, that is something that will also be featured in the apostolic writings in my introductory material. So I've already written up a full article about this, and I'm just going to preview a bit about what this is. You see, about 25 years ago, there was a discovery made of Bible codes, at least in terms of the general public being aware that the Hebrew text of what we call the Torah had certain messages that were hidden, but you had to skip a fixed amount of letters to get each letter in the sequence. It's what we call equidistant letter sequencing. Now, to give you a famous example of how that works, if you go to the first book of the Torah, the Bible, Genesis, right, Bereshit, and you go to the first place where the letter T occurs, if you count 50 letters from the T, you'll get an O. If you count 50 letters from the O, you'll get an R. If you count 50 letters from the R, you'll get an H. It spells out Torah in units of 50. And it does it again in Exodus. And then in the last two books of the Torah, in Numbers and in Deuteronomy, it does the same exact thing, but it spells Torah out backwards. Now, what about the middle book, Leviticus? In Leviticus, it does a equidistant letter sequencing of 8 for the name of God, for Yahweh. So you go to the Y, you count 8, you count 8 letters, you get to the H, you count 8 letters, you get to the W, and then you count 8 letters and you get to the H. This is just to tell you what the research is about. When this broke about 20 years ago, I was quite skeptical for a variety of reasons, because people were using the Torah codes to try to predict the future. This is which in the Bible we call nachash, divination, which is a forbidden practice. And so there's no way that the Torah would have codes telling you to do what the Torah itself says, don't do that, right? So there were some abuses in the system. There were some problems, and I was skeptical for a very long time. But then I met an Orthodox rabbi at Pentecost, or Shavuot, Feast of Weeks, and he showed me that if you look for certain patterns that fit your name, you can find stuff about yourself written in the Bible. And what he meant by that was, you look for a verse that starts with the first letter of your name and ends with the last letter of your name, right? So my Hebrew name is Gabriel, right? So I looked for a verse, or he showed me the first one, that began with a G and ended with an L, right? And to my astonishment, I found a number of verses that seemed to be all about me, okay? And some other people asked, and I did the same thing, because once the rabbi showed me how to do it. And everything I found for other people was also miraculously on point. So there was something going on. I had to reevaluate what I thought about the previous Torah codes research. And so I began to get curious to see if Yeshua's name, which is spelled YSH, UA, which in Hebrew is Yod, Shin, Wa, Ayin, if his name was encoded in the Hebrew Bible. And what I found out was, oh yeah, it was big time. To give you an example of the types of codes that I found, what would happen is, it wasn't just that, say, the first letter of a series of words would be his name. That was one type of code. Another type of code would put his name at a skip sequence of 3 letters. But what was also very cool was that the other parts of the verse that were not coded were about Yeshua. So, for example, one of the places that Yeshua's name appears is in the opening chapter of Ruth, 1 verse 1, the very opening line of the book of Ruth. And what I noticed was it said, after you got to the last letter of the name, the text said after that, a man came from Bethlehem in Judah. A man came and went out from Bethlehem in Judah. And so you have Yeshua as the first part of the code. And then the very next Hebrew words are saying, Yeshua, a man who came from Bethlehem in Judea. Now, when we read the opening chapter and verse of Ruth, it's not the man that's being described there is named Elimelech. Well, Elimelech in Hebrew means God is my king. So now you have this other message, Yeshua, a man who came from Bethlehem in Judea. God is his king. Okay. In another place in Leviticus, about the high priest, Yeshua's name appears, and it spells out a longer message that says, behold the blood of Yeshua, right when the high priest is doing a sacrifice. And there's others. But the point is, I made these codes very, very restrictive because I thought people were going around willy-nilly. And if you can't see that code within, say, 3 verses, it's not worth looking at. Because if I'm going to show this to the Orthodox community, the Orthodox Jewish community, and I'm going to say the name Yeshua is encoded in the Bible, I better make sure I'm bringing my very, very best. So it's not just that the letters are coming out this way, where you could say, oh, that's just random. It's the phrases that are after the name appears that are also about Yeshua. To that end, I showed these codes to the Orthodox rabbi who taught me about looking for my name in the Bible. And he's not a believer in Yeshua. And I wasn't trying to convert him. I just said, Rabbi, take a look at this. And you know what happened? He agreed with me. I then took it to a native Israeli Hebrew speaker and another Hebrew expert. They agreed with me. This is real. It's not something I can make up. The name of the Messiah is all over the Hebrew Bible and in verses that relate exactly and exclusively to him. And that was what we talked about.
So is there, like some people could say, oh, you know, that could happen in any book.
Yeah.
I know you're all about numbers.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, sometimes you make my head spin because you're very gifted in numbers. And I'm not talking numerology, I'm talking numbers. So what would be the
called
odds?
sacred math.
What would be the odds, do you think, of just even one instance or 2 or 3?
Well, again, this was why I made it very difficult. In any large group of text, there was a Torah code skeptic named Brendan McKay from Australia, and he took the book Moby Dick, and he did the same thing that the rabbinic guys were doing with the computer. And he said, look, I found codes about Mahatma Gandhi being shot. I found codes about the Kennedy assassination in Moby Dick. So he called it a parlor trick. But you see, this is why the method was wrong. Okay, if you have to wait 200 letters to get to the next part of a sequence, your code is trash. Okay, it's not going to help anybody if you have to strain somebody and make them wait, hundreds and hundreds of letters to get to that part of the code. And so what I did with my code was I said the code cannot begin more than 22 letters from the start of the verse, and the maximum number of letters that you can skip is 22. So that every single code that I've come up with, you can see it within a field of like 3 verses, okay? On top of that, to also demand that the Hebrew text that's being pointed to by Yeshua's name also be about Yeshua. The Orthodox rabbi that I showed this to agreed with me that this is a multiple billion to one shot for each occurrence, let alone several of them. So I do believe that the restrictions that I put in place to make it so much harder would overwhelm the critics who are saying, no, just it's a random thing that happens in any sufficiently large text. And I would say, no, not to that degree, not to have it all be about Yeshua, even the words that are not coded, multiple billion to one shot.
Well, that's just absolutely amazing. So, okay, one of the things that really blessed me, your video, two-part video series
Mm-hmm.
on the Bethlehem Star.
Mm-hmm.
For those that haven't seen that, could you talk a little bit about that?
Oh, yeah. That was a wonderful project. That's the fruition of 20 years of research that I've been doing on the Star of Bethlehem. Two-part video series. You go to my website, it's right there on the screen, onefaith1peopleministries.com, and you will see it in the upper right corner of the homepage. Okay. What I did was I basically figured out the entire chronology, not just of Yeshua's birth, death, and resurrection, but of the entire Bible. And I did this through astronomical occurrences that I could date precisely. I looked at other biblical chronology sources and other, what say the Assyrians and the Babylonians who were keeping track of time, a whole bunch of other things to come up with a very, very tight, reliable chronology. When it comes to Yeshua, what ended up happening was that I tracked a series of 26 signs, rare celestial happenings, that began with a triple conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn in the constellation of Pisces. We need to remember that the Magi, they were astronomers and astrologers from Babylon. Okay, so the skies were sending a message to the Magi that a world savior was about to be born in a land to their west. And I tracked these 26 signs from May of 7 BCE and a whole bunch of signs that brought the Magi right to Yeshua in September of 5 BC. And then a series of what I call post-nativity signs, amazing conjunctions of Jupiter and Venus and things of that nature, that were tracking Yeshua and his family when they had fled to Egypt and when they came back from Egypt. So 26 signs over a 5-year period, many of them extremely rare, many of them coming on significant dates of the Hebrew calendar. Let me give you a quick example of what I'm talking about that, okay? And just like the Yeshua codes, when you factor in what I'm about to tell you, also each one a multiple billion to one shot, okay? So the first conjunction, Jupiter, as the Magi call of Jupiter, is the king star. The reason we know it's a planet is because only planets move east-west. Fixed stars rise and set. They go up and down, okay? So, it wouldn't be a comet or a meteor or anything like that because you can't track it continuously for 2 years as the Magi did. So you can eliminate all that stuff. And what you're left with is one of 5 planets that could be seen with the naked eye 2,000 years ago. That is the planet named after the king, in this case, a pagan king, a pagan god. And that king star comes together with the planet. Now, Saturn is considered a Jewish planet because Saturn is the day of the Shabbat is Saturday. Saturday is Saturn's day. Okay, that's where we get the term Saturday. It is the day of Saturn. And so you have the Jews keeping the Shabbat on Saturday, and you have a king, which is Jupiter, and they jam together like this in the constellation of Pisces. Pisces is also Jewish because of Jonah being swallowed by a great fish. Okay. So this conjunction is spelling out sort of like a headline, an astrological headline to the Magi saying, the king of the Jews who is also the savior from Saturn, is going to be in the sign of the Jews in the land of Israel. Now that conjunction happens 3 times in 4 or 5 months. Okay. That has only happened once in the last 2,000 years since. So that's how rare that is. So here's my point. Conjunction 1 is on the 3rd day of the 3rd month of Sivan, May 29th in 7 BC. The 3rd day of the 3rd month is the day that Yahweh came down in fire onto Mount Sinai to announce the 10 Commandments. It's right there in Exodus 19. So here he is on the day that he announced that the 10 Commandments was coming. He's announcing that the word will be made flesh on the same exact Hebrew day. Then the second conjunction hits on the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur. I mean, if that's not a sign about the Jewish Messiah, I don't know what is. And then the third one hits on December 4th. That is the full moon of the 9th month of Kislev. Now, you got to kind of dig into the history to see why that's important. This was the full moon of Kislev. That was when the Syrian Greeks defiled the altar in the temple and set off the Maccabean revolt, from where we get Hanukkah. They put a pig on the altar of the Jerusalem temple on the full moon of Kislev, which is the sign of the 3rd conjunction. To the Magi who are tracking this and may be thinking of going to Israel, now they're in the rainy season. And they've just been given a sign of war. So maybe they're going to say, we're not going to grab the frankincense and go right now. We're going to wait and see if the signs in the heavens get better. And this teaching shows how they tracked sign after sign after sign until they got the one sign that they knew unmistakably told them they had to go to Jerusalem. And that's what the teaching is about.
So are there any signs indicating that signs in the heavens that we are entering the time spoken of in Revelation?
Possibly. I have to parse my answer kind of carefully, because the issue that I have is that the signs in the heavens must be also lining up with certain sacred math things to be certain to link it. Okay, I'm very, very precise so what I mean by that is, if you look in Daniel chapter 9, and I think we did a bit of a teaching on Daniel in one of our talks. You have those 70 weeks that point to the exact time, that the exact day, the exact hour that Yeshua dies. Okay, just skipping to the, spoiler alert, skipping to the end of that teaching. And so Daniel's count of prophetic weeks is mimicking the 7-year land Sabbath. Okay, so I wondered what would be, he's already used that land Sabbath cycle to come the first time. What cycle of time is he going to use to come back the second time? Did a lot of research and prayer about it. And what I came up with was, after 7, the next significant number is 50, right? Because you go 7 times 7, right, to get to 49, and then you get your jubilee. So that if Yeshua left in the middle of the 70th week, which he did, the exact center point of that 7-year period, he would return in the midst of the 70th Jubilee, which is the next cycle that's available to him. Okay. And so where this comes in is, when is the 70th Jubilee? And the answer is it depends on how you count. If you counting just from when they entered into Canaan under Joshua, right? Then we have another 100 years to go. We're in Jubilee 68. But there were other jubilees that happened before the 50-year cycle was given. There were the heart of the jubilee is obey and stay, disobey, die, and leave, right? And so there were two occasions when Father Yah had the earth revert to the original owner, which is himself, where he took the earth back from man. And those two occasions were when Adam and Eve were expelled from paradise. They couldn't get back to the tree of life, and the land was not going to bear fruit easily to them. And then the second time, of course, is the flood, Noah's flood. So the big question, Celeste, is do I take those situational jubilees and add them to the ones that came under Moses and Joshua, right? If the answer is yes, then we're in the 70th Jubilee now, since 1995, and Yeshua would have to return before this Jubilee ends in 2045. But if we're counting only the 50-year ones, we have another 100 years. And so Father Yah has not told me which of those two scenarios is correct. He said, I'm not going to tell you that. I'm not telling you that. That'd give away the whole show. So I don't know. But the point is, what we end up doing to try to figure that out is look for these signs in the heavens that you're asking me about. So I know it took me a while to kind of get back to that. So, but the point is, if you know you are in a significant period of time, Yeshua said, look up, your salvation draws near, right? One of the possible signs that may be about Yeshua's return has to do with an asteroid that is on its way to Earth right now. I don't know if you've heard of this asteroid called Apophis. Okay. I began hearing about Apophis, and NASA released information about it in 2013. And they've said that the asteroid will miss us. It's absolutely going to miss us, but it's going to come very, very close. It's going to be as close as our satellites are orbiting the planet. Okay, so that's close. I look at Apophis, which is named after the Egyptian deity that brings the end of the world in Egyptian myth. Okay, why would they do that? I don't know, but that's what they did. And that may be a sign, that we're getting close to Yeshua's return. For me, I'm going to say most likely date, the date that the math is screaming at, for the short range, is the year 2030, which is, 7 years from now. And in 2030 is the 2000th anniversary of the resurrection. So that's a big, big deal. 2000 is a hugely important number in the sacred math. It is identical to the year that Yeshua died in terms of solar terms. Okay. So my point is that Apophis is going to be here in 2029, in April of 2029. And then the very next year is this amazing 2000th anniversary of the resurrection. Then I was looking for another sign. And you know how in the book of Revelation, they talk about the dragon, right? It just so happens that in 2030, at least that's the current schedule. NASA can always change it. It's the government. They can change what they want. But currently, the mission to Mars, which is the planet of war and blood, is scheduled in 2030 with the rocket. It's called the Dragon. And Mars, of course, as I said, it represents war. So here you have another thing astronomically and about space coming together in this prophetic window. Now, does that mean that I'm declaring Yeshua is definitely coming back in 2030 or 2045? I'm absolutely not doing that. I do not want to be a Jewish William Miller and have a great disappointment on my hands. Okay, 1844 should have taught us all a very powerful lesson about that. But is it a possible return scenario? Yes. Is it a scenario that can be backed up by math, astronomy, and scripture? Yes. So that's where we're at.
So another thing that I really enjoy in your weekly parshas is that you go into archaeology.
Mhm.
So what interesting things have been going on that have been catching your eye in the archaeological world?
A lot of different things right now going on. One of the most dramatic things that has happened is an updating of a teaching I did in 2017 called The Lost Biography of Peter. About 10 years ago, I found evidence that Peter was buried in Jerusalem and not in Rome. Obviously, very bad business for the Roman Catholic Church. That they had found a series of ossuaries underneath a monastery called Dominis Flevit, our master wept. And in there was a series of symbols that proved this was a Jewish Christian cemetery, as in several crosses all over the place. Okay. And there was also the sign of what we call the Chi-Rho. Okay. The Chi-Rho is the first two letters in the Greek name for Christ. Okay. Chi-Rho, Christos. And it looks like an X and a P. This was not only an extremely early Christian symbol, it was also became the seal of St. Peter in the Roman Catholic Church. If you ever see their seal, it looks like you've got like the keys as an X, and you get this like scepter and three crowns that looks like a P, right? That's their official logo. That is the seal of St. Peter. And there it is, right there in this tomb, with next to an ossuary that says in Aramaic, Shimon bar Yonah, Simon, son of Jonah. This is what Yeshua called Peter in Matthew 16, verse 17. Blessed are you, Shimon bar Yonah, for flesh and blood have not revealed that I am the Son of the living Yah, but only my Father who is in heaven. And so not only did we find this Aramaic name, Shimon bar Yonah, right next to it was the Chi-Rho. Right next to that was the grave of Martha, Mary, and Lazarus.
Wow.
Yeah.
So
now,
where
huh?
is that? Where is that cemetery?
It was originally on the Mount of Olives on the grounds of this place called Dominis Flevit. However, there was a huge cover-up. And I found out that they had moved those ossuaries from there. Okay. Worse than that, the ossuary that held Peter's remains was broken, was deliberately vandalized. Okay. And then taken out of its archaeological context on the pretense of restoration to another church. And the reason, of course, is when you broke the ossuary, any organic material that could be dated for DNA, to compare it to the skeleton that the Romans say they have, it's gone. Okay. So what ended up happening, this was the basic teaching that I did in 2017. Just in December of 2022, one of my ministry friends tracked the ossuary to where it was supposedly being restored. And we got back the first color photographs of these ossuaries that have ever been taken. And the first new pictures since 1958, 65 years ago. So with better pictures, digital, high res, color pictures, you can see a lot more stuff than you could before. Because and I know I'm kind of mixing the timeline a little bit, but just to give this for context, they found the tombs in 1953. In 1958, the archaeologist wrote a report, okay, and supposedly released their findings to the public. Yeah, in Italian, and you can't get the book now. They're covering it up, in other words. You get one digital copy of it online that you can rent for an hour, and then they take it back if someone else wants it. So they're really making it very, very hard, which is why, with all these sources attempting to be covered up by the Roman Catholic Church, my guy who went in there and basically charmed the Franciscans that run the place, he just kind of comes across as this nice, sweet old man, just really curious, could be a wonderful thing to do for me, please. They gave him access. And so now we've got some new data about the inscription that is going to give greater attestation that this is in fact Peter's grave on the Mount of Olives in Jerusalem. And that updated report will be in the study guide, the companion volume to the Apostolic Writings translation. So that's just one example of the archaeological stuff that we're looking at.
Yeah, every week you just really do this wonderful blend of weaving in, of course, the linguistics, which you are so good at, but also the archaeological and the astronomical things that most people don't ever look at or they think of in a modern context. Now, is that the material? I know you've been on the quest for some time to dig into the Vatican and what reserves they have.
That's a separate adventure. Yes.
Yeah. So are you willing to talk about a little bit of that adventure at all?
Yes, sure.
Okay.
I'll be happy to. Okay. So picture this. There is about 300 years ago, the Vatican decided that their library was a mess. They had stuff scattered all over the place. Nobody had attempted to put any order to it whatsoever, right? And so they hired somebody, an Aramaic scholar from Lebanon, to become their chief librarian, and he was in charge of cleaning up the library and releasing, under the seal of the Pope, of actually 3 popes, I should say, a catalog showing what the Vatican has. They wanted to do this for the Aramaic documents first, and then we're going to get to some other ones later. So this guy, he comes in, and he's just writing down what he sees. And he says in one of the entries, found a copy of the Gospels in Aramaic written in 78 AD. Let that date sink in. 78 AD, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in Aramaic. And again, this was under the papal seal, which means the Vatican says, yes, we have it. Okay? Then, after he releases it, a whole bunch of scholars say he doesn't know what he's talking about. The cover-up has begun, in other words, right? No. We know the New Testament was originally written in Greek, and even if it was in Greek, it wouldn't have been as old as 78 AD. To put it in context, most New Testament scholars say the earliest known possible fragment of the New Testament is dated to the year 125. Okay? And today they're saying they're not even sure if it's that old. And then they look at another fragment that comes from 256 AD. So even later, and they go, no, that's of the New Testament. So from 125 to 256. To the idea that there would be a copy of the Gospels under one cover, by the way, which did not happen immediately either, that it would not be written in Greek, that in Aramaic. And by the way, it was written by an apostle that knew both Peter and Paul. Okay. This is an extraordinary thing. And so when I first saw this 20 years ago, I was like, wow, these other scholars are really being nasty. They never even saw the documents, and they're saying it's a fraud. They're making all of these assumptions that because it doesn't fit their theory of what they think was the transmission of the New Testament, that it has to be a fraud. Meanwhile, not one of them ever went to Rome to talk to the librarian who found it. Okay. And so I said, you know what? I need to track this down. I need to see if there are other things in the Vatican Library that talk about the manuscript. And I found a bunch because by the grace of Yah, I have access to the Vatican Digital Archive. I'm on their list of people that can access it. So they don't make it easy. I mean, they got millions and millions of stuff, and they don't try to classify it in a way that makes sense. So it takes a while. But I found what I was looking for, and I found references that even in the late 19th century, the popes were saying they've got the Vatican. They've got the first century Gospels in Aramaic. In the 20th century, they begin to deny it. Because after all, that's bad for business, right? And so the research that I've been doing, I actually got to talk to people that are running the Vatican Library. And I found out more information. They do have it. They do not want people to know that they have it. Okay. And once they realized that I was getting red hot on their trail, they stopped talking to me. I was trying to be, very, very low key about it, but then they go, "Oh, wait a minute, no, we have nothing more to say to you." So that's the other adventure with the Roman Catholic Church that I'm on, asking
Well,
them.
you'll have to find another little nice old man or
Yeah,
woman to
yeah,
go in and just see
yeah. I get
what
a little
they can
passionate.
do.
I'm not exactly like, "Oh, please," and it's just not. It's just me.
No, no,
Not how I roll. So
no.
sorry.
So I know that when I went to do archaeology over in Qumran, that's when the Pope was over there, and it's my understanding that he bought the upper room and a part of the Jewish quarter. So is this part of the cover up?
Mhm.
So Rome is basically going, or the Vatican is going in, buying up parts of the Holy Land,
Yeah,
and that way they can quietly erase history, which is
exactly.
what we've seen
Yeah,
over and over, revisionist history.
yeah. Even if it means breaking a 2,000-year-old precious ossuary with Peter's name on it. Yeah. Bad for
Yeah.
business. Can't have it. But what's interesting also about that is that apparently they were in a hurry because the inscription's still completely intact. So whatever they were trying to do by doing that, the evidence remains. The only thing they succeeded in doing is preventing us from testing the remains, which is unfortunate. So
So I don't know that we've ever talked about it, but have you ever studied or had any interest in looking at the Shroud of Turin?
I have looked at this. Yeah. I have concluded, and I've gone through this research for 30 years. I've concluded it's authentic. It is the burial shroud of Yeshua that is burned with the image of his resurrection on the cloth. And one of the things to talk a little bit about that, the main argument against it is that, we did these carbon-14 tests in 1988, and it came up with like a date that was between the 1290 and 1360 or something like that. So Middle Ages. Here's the thing. The way the carbon-14 tests work is when a living thing dies, and linen is from an animal, so it dies, the carbon-14 decays at a rate that they can track. So that the less carbon you have in a living material, the older it is, okay? The problem was, because the Roman Catholic Church was so nervous, they should have taken the sample from the center of the cloth, because that's where humans haven't touched it, okay? When we touch something, guess what happens? we put more carbon back into the shroud. And they took it from the corners. And that's where everybody handled it. Kings, popes, they're spreading it out. They're holding it by the corners, right? And so they're putting carbon-14 back. And then if that isn't bad enough, there was a fire in 1538 or something like that. And the document was seared, and they took it from the burned part of the thing. And guess what fire does? It also adds carbon back to make it appear younger than it is. So that's debunking that. But then there is this amazing face cloth, also with blood, called the Sudarian, and it's in a place called Oviedo, Spain. And we can document that Sudarian to the early 600s. And when you put the blood pattern of the Sudarian over the Shroud of Turin, it perfectly matches. So we know that the same body came in contact with the Sudarian, which is the face cloth, and with the Shroud of Turin, which is the long linen cloth that they wrapped him in. Okay, if you can trace the face cloth to 600 AD, then the shroud is also at least that old. But then you have other evidence like pollen samples that only grow in Jerusalem, that only grow in the springtime in Jerusalem, and can be dated to be 2,000 years old. So when you put all this together, and people say, well, a medieval forger did this. I'm like, really? In the Middle Ages, they thought Yeshua was crucified through the palm. And in the Shroud of Turin, he's crucified through the wrists, which is exactly where the right way to do that. And they didn't know details about the type of whips that the Romans used, called flagrums. And remember, the Romans had scourged him. And they found they had little iron ball bearings. Medieval people didn't know that that's what the whips were like. And we found where the ball bearings had hit on his back. And of course, the shroud also has him wearing a crown of thorns, which is not standard procedure for crucifixion. So you put all that, and I've been convinced for about 10 years now, the shroud is exactly what the faithful believe it is. It is the cloth that wrapped Yeshua at his execution by Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus. And it is burned with an image that nobody can replicate. Nobody can explain how it got there, with 3D characteristics, right? And no one today understands how they did it. So it's a miracle. And so, yes, it is authentic.
Yeah, that's been my conclusion for quite some time as well. So I know that you recently in a Parsha determined, I know that this has been a big mystery, or actually contention within the body, about when exactly was Yeshua, Jesus, crucified, and when was he resurrected? And that makes a big difference. Do you want to speak to that for just a few moments?
I will try. You're talking about 30 years of research that got me to where I'm at now. The long and short of it is that while I know that for very well-meaning reasons, a lot of people that are in our Torah Messianic faith walk favor a Wednesday to Saturday timeline from when Yeshua died to when he resurrected. Okay. Well, as you know, I research astronomy a lot. And I concluded that I concluded that Daniel is pointing to 30 AD, no doubt about it, okay, for the year of Yeshua's death. And in 30 AD, there is no way you can have the Passover or the Feast of Unleavened Bread on a Wednesday. It's impossible. It is astronomically impossible. But I didn't want to go to the Friday, because to me, the math didn't add up. I'm like, how do you get 1.5 days when it says 3 days and 3 nights in Matthew 12:40? And what I found out was that Yeshua, in fact, much to my shock and in contradiction to 20 years of my understanding, Yeshua actually was crucified on a Friday, which I didn't want that to be the case, Celeste. I fought this like you would not believe. I'm like, no, not a Friday. Anything but a Friday, a Thursday maybe. But the evidence proved it. And that's a very long story, but basically here it is in a nutshell. Matthew, Mark, and Luke talk about the sun going down at noon, right? For 3 hours, from the 6th hour to the 9th hour, right? What a lot of people don't know is that the prophet Amos predicted that miracle 800 years in advance in his 8th chapter. He said, I will make the sun go down at noon. I will turn your festivals into mourning, and you will mourn for an only begotten son. I mean, this is clearly about crucifixion day, right? So this is what I wondered. I said, if Yeshua died on a Friday, is there a way to look at the sun going down at noon as affecting the count to get to 3 days and 3 nights? And the answer is yes. There was one final piece to the puzzle, and that final piece was that Yeshua himself said to count the time from when he was crucified, not when he's buried at the end of the day. He says, when you lift up the Son of Man, you will know that I am he. Well, how did the Son of Man get lifted up? When they crucified him. This occurs twice in the Gospel of John, and it's clear that he is talking about his death. When you lift me up, you will know who I am. Okay? So you plug that little detail in, and Mark tells us that he was crucified around 9 o'clock in the morning, right? And so if I look at the sun going down at noon, as you know, that ends the Hebrew day. Doesn't it? Doesn't the Hebrew day end at sunset? Right?
Yeah.
Okay. So from when he is crucified at 9, when the sun goes down at noon, that's the end of the day. That's day 1.
Mm-hmm.
Then when with the darkness is night 1. Then about 3 o'clock in the afternoon, guess what happens? The sun comes back. That's the start of day 2. Then the sun goes down again and starts the Shabbat, which is the start of night 2. See where I'm going here? If you keep counting, you can fit 3 days and 3 nights from Friday morning to Sunday morning. Okay? And then this also matched 3 dozen other places where it said that Yeshua rose on the 3rd day, by the 3rd day, during the 3rd day. Nobody seems to want to deal with those verses, right? So when I'm looking at that, I realized it was another way to count the same period of time. That now, when Yeshua is crucified, that day 1 is going to be from Friday morning to sunset. Then your day 2 is going to be a full Hebrew day from Friday sunset to Saturday sunset, the Shabbat. Then he rises from the dead on Sunday morning, which by this counting is in the middle of day 3. And so in that way, all the scriptures agree about the timeline. And like I said, it was not a conclusion I was wanting to have. I did not want him going up on a Friday, but Father Yah outranked me. So this is what it is. This explains all of the confusion that has been taught about Passion Week, and specifically this interval between crucifixion and resurrection. And it was predicted 900 years in advance by Amos and Zechariah and a couple of other prophets that mix into that. So that's
why I love your research, because you bring all these things together, from the whole counsel of God to the linguistics, to the the astronomical signs to just many different things. And then it all comes together and you really work hard. And so I know that I truly value um, one faith, one people ministries, and
Thank
your Parsha teachings. I mean, it is invaluable in my spiritual walk. And so, could you tell folks a little bit about what you do each week so
you.
that they might be blessed too?
Yep, I'd be happy to. And thank you for your support of One Faith, One People Ministries. It's been a great way that we've been connecting over the years to deepen our friendship, and I very much appreciate you, Celeste, for that. What we do, though, at One Faith, One People Ministries.com is we provide fresh weekly biblical teaching, averaging about 3 hours every week, sometimes more, sometimes maybe a little less. And we go over the weekly Torah portion, that part between Genesis and Deuteronomy, and start of Genesis and the end of Deuteronomy that Jews read on Shabbat. We will do that. We'll go over and do an overview and read it for the first video. For the second video, I will get into the matching reading in the prophets, Isaiah, Jeremiah, all those guys, what we call the Haftorah, right? And then we will do a reading from the Renewed Covenant, New Testament, that matches the other two. And then after that, I do a special feature called Beyond the Torah, which basically is dealing with other books of the Hebrew Bible that typically don't get read in the weekly Sabbath. And so we'll be reading from Joshua, Judges, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, and we'll just be doing that in order. We've been doing that for 3 years. The reason I decided to do that was so that I could be translating a chapter of Tanakh every week. Mm-hmm. And it's really helped me make progress on the Tanakh translation as a result of that. Third video, the advanced class. We're going to get into the linguistics. We're going to get into Hebrew and Aramaic and Greek. We're going to show the different readings of what is, for some, controversial readings, disputed readings. Why does the Catholic Church look at it this way and the rabbis look at it that way? So we'll have that discussion. We'll go into the rabbinic traditions. We'll go into the different languages that gave birth to these scriptures. We'll look at the history that gave birth to those scriptures, and archaeology and astronomy too. Video 3. Video 4, what we call my sermon video in a way. I do my Torah thought for the week to wrap the whole thing up, answer questions from our members, what I call member Q&A, and just wrap that whole thing up in a nice package. So that's what you get every week. And I don't recycle Parsha videos ever. And I'm doing this 10 years and I've never recycled a Parsha video. So this is the cutting edge research that is literally breaking news right now that you're going to get. Like the story I told about Peter, that was breaking with my friend in Israel sending me updates as I was filming. Okay, so it doesn't get more fresh than that. And then in addition to all those things, we have feast teachings for Passover, for Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, Sukkot, Hanukkah, all free. Our feast teachings are always free, and special teachings that I also do, like on Peter and other things that come up, those are also free. So we're trying to balance giving people, to follow the Torah commandment that you do not go back to get the produce that has fallen from your cart. You leave that for the people who can't afford it for whatever reason. And then for those who will subscribe, very modest prices for an annual membership is $69.95. A monthly membership is $9.95. And I've not raised those prices since the ministry began. So that's basically what I do every week. And it's an honor and a privilege to do that because we build up a community of like-minded believers who want to understand how all these other things from archaeology and astronomy and what were the politics of the time and stuff like that, how that informs how their Bible reads. And I don't think anyone else is really doing it that exact way on the web. So
No,
that
your stuff is absolutely unique. And one thing you forgot that I really appreciate, and I go over and over and over because, okay, so I'm listening and or following along as you're reading and discussing, and but sometimes you want to revisit a thought. Like I just sent you a question the other day. Somewhere in your teaching here, I
right.
like I just couldn't remember. But what you provide that is a blessing to me is you actually provide a written PDF that
Yeah,
people also, so you don't have to just listen to Andrew's every word because 3 hours, it can be a little bit of time
yeah,
there. And you might get a phone call or whatever, have a distraction, have to put dinner on or whatever.
yeah.
And
Great.
but so that PDF to me is very valuable because then I can go, now what, because you are so precise and because you do such an excellent presentation and you don't make mistakes, you hash it over a lot before you even present it. I want, like, when I'm thinking about it now, did Andrew say that exactly the way that I'm remembering it, or because I had this distraction and then I have the opportunity to just revisit it without like going through 3 hours of video again to try and catch it. So to me, that's
Well,
very valuable
yeah,
resource that you provide. I think
and
you
also the
on
MP3s as well, so people can listen in their car, you know, on the commute or something. And that's an excellent point. What also happens is, though, I will make, from time to time, something that needs clarifying. So what will happen is, I'll listen to the video, and if I'm speaking too quickly or if I'm not being clear for whatever reason, I will then go back to the notes and update the notes so that when you see the notes, I will say, you know, I want to be clearer than I was necessarily. So before you watch video 3, this is what I mean, right? So in that way, I'm trying to hold myself accountable. If there is something that I need to say in a better way or a different way, or if I do make an occasional mistake, I will acknowledge it publicly. Because if you make a statement about the Bible publicly and you realize that, wait, I didn't factor this in, right, for whatever reason, because I'm human, I will then say, please refer to this from this parsha. When I said this, I should have also included the other point of view, which is that, you see. And in that way, continual evolution of getting better and better,
yes.
in terms of the way I deliver it, in terms of the way people respond to it. And I encourage them to actively engage with me. If you got a question, ask me. I'll go on the air and answer it for you and a whole bunch of other people, you know?
And you do write back in email, and
And I
if I have
can,
a
yeah.
question, you're very good about in a few days. Don't expect it instantaneous,
No,
but Andrew always gets back to you. You just do, which is a real blessing for those of us who want to be Bereans and just really search the scriptures really deeply. So
yeah.
I
I mean,
think
I
I
want
want
people to do that, hold me to account, check with me, challenge me. It's okay. Whether you'll end up agreeing or disagreeing with me is almost not the point. The point is you cared enough about the scriptures to investigate it for yourself. And I want to give you those tools so that you're not starting from scratch, so that you can benefit from what I've seen over the past several decades.
So I want to kind of wrap this up with so there was one night, I think it was a Friday night, but I can't remember because it's been a long time ago. And you did, I think it was a 10-minute video, maybe it was longer. And I am not a night person. And so I started at like 8 o'clock at night and I saw your video and I like, okay, I just dove in. And that was about, is the temple going to be on the Temple Mount or a different
Right.
location? And
Yeah.
I mean, I spent literally all night
That's a
looking at
4-hour
all
teaching,
the,
Celeste.
yeah.
I never intended anyone to watch it in one shot, but more power to you.
Well, I stayed up all night, not only doing from your research, but you basically led me down rabbit trails where I found different accounts and things myself. Where, where do you believe that the temple will be built, and where could people find that for our teaching?
Well, that teaching is available for free on One Faith, One People Ministries.com. And you might have to search for it. It's called Where Was the Original Temple? So you can go under the free section and you can search Where Was the Original Temple? It'll come right up. Okay. As to where the temple is, I have been convinced over the past 10 to 15 years now that the traditional Temple Mount is not where the temple was, okay, for a wide variety of reasons. One of the big ones being you don't build a temple to Yahweh in the opposite direction of the water supply, and you don't use Roman style aqueducts to bring the water either. It's a violation of Jewish law. So where was it? It's in the city of David, okay, Ir David, and it's located right above the Gihon Spring, which is the only freshwater, living water source for the city of Jerusalem. It's at the end of Hezekiah's tunnel. If you've ever gone into Jerusalem and gone to Hezekiah's tunnel, you go to the end, and there's a place where the water comes up, and that water would then be stored for the day in a special kind of a reservoir. And when it had built up to a massive amount of water at the end of the day, they would then release it, and it would clean off the sacrifices and the blood and the junk from the altar, the temple. So, and as Celeste, as you said, it's a long story. We're going through like 36 or more biblical verses that prove the temple was located over an upward living water flowing spring. Places like Ezekiel 47, 1 through 2, Psalm 45 and 46, and a whole bunch of other places, right? And then we're also going to follow how the story developed and changed in the rabbinic tradition to where they are totally convinced that it's on Temple Mount. And I know there's a number of folks in our faith walk that are convinced it's also on Temple Mount. I totally love, honor, and respect them all. But in that respect, I have to say, sorry, guys. The Temple Mount is the highest place in Jerusalem. The temple would not have been there, been put there. That's where the Romans put the Antonia fortress to look down upon the temple. Okay? And we know this because in the book of Acts, the Roman soldiers had to rescue Paul, who was being beaten at the temple, was being beaten by a bunch of an angry mob, and they had to drag him up the stairs to get him into the Antonia fortress, which means the Antonia fortress is overlooking the temple. If you go to Temple Mount, that's the top of Jerusalem. You have nowhere else to go if that's where the temple was. And like I said, it's a very, very long story. But everything from the Psalms of David to the prophet Ezekiel, historian Josephus, even Roman historians said the temple was located over upward flowing living water. Why would the Romans lie? What stake do they have in it? And the guy who said that was writing only 40 years after they destroyed Jerusalem. So there's a lot to go through. And that's why you were up all night.
Yep. And I went into medieval pilgrimage accounts, the whole 10 yards. It's just really a fascinating journey if you want to take a real Indiana Jones type adventure. I would really highly recommend that particular.
Maybe do one video a day.
Yeah. Yeah. Pace yourself. So
make sure you have some snacks.
Yeah, because really the important thing is to dive into the scriptures for some of these other things. are not really as critical, but it's really critical for your faith walk to be in the scriptures every
To be
day.
informed, basically.
Yep. Yep. And at least know what that there's other other places, and the stories that we hear across the board, whether it's astronomy, archaeology, science, is not it's all being rewritten. It's all propaganda. We are getting very little of the truth. And actually, all of us have to realize that other than the holy writ that we hold in our hands, the whole counsel of God, that really is the only truth. And in some, uh, what do you call it when they're not actual translations, transliterations and things? They're
Mhm.
not, they can change the words and the meaning, especially because they don't maybe know the cultural um,
Yeah, it's a
inflections or
complicated
what.
issue. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So anyway, I just want to thank you, Andrew. I hope it's not as long this time. I hope we've reconnected enough that we can get you back. And please let me know if there's anything that you'd like to come on the show and just talk to people about, especially as the
Writings, yeah.
apostolic writings
Yep.
comes forth. And because I know people are really excited about it. They're asking me, and I'm like, I don't know, you know?
Well, I'll leave you with a little fun fact about the apostolic writings. It's also an acrostic. If you take the first letter of each of those words, it spells out "ta," which is the last letter of the Hebrew alphabet, which means
Eh,
I really, really hope this is the last time I have to do this.
Yeah, I understand that completely. So, anyway, may Father Yah bless you and the work of your hands, and bless your home, you and your wife, and this
Thank you.
ministry, because it is a blessing and it's enriching the faith walk of many, many people.
I'll let
And
her know
you
you said
go
that,
what?
and I'll let her know you said that, and uh, with my wife Jay, I couldn't do what I do. You know, she does a whole bunch of other things so that I can focus on this. So, very much a team effort.
Yeah, so I get as a single widow now, I get to the how I get what I get done is the prayers of the body of Christ.
Mhm,
That's the wind under my wings. Of course, I
mhm.
get favor from the Lord, and I get my direction from Him. But um, the actual energy that it takes, comes from the prayers of the people, because it when I look, sometimes I scratch my head like, how did I even accomplish that much in a day? So
Yeah, yeah.
anyway, have a blessed Shabbat
You too. Shabbat
shalom,
shalom.
and we will see you the next time.
Yep. Thank you, Celeste. Blessings
Thank
to you.
you, Andrew.